Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the immigration Q&A session. Tonight, we are joined by recent graduates and international students from institutions all across Canada and, of course, internationally. My name is Han, and I will be moderating our session tonight. Before we begin, I do have a few housekeeping items to go over with you. These are just some items just to make sure everything's going as smoothly as possible. So all participants have been muted. There's no need to use video, and you should be able to hear via your computer audio device. And of course, this session will be recorded and sent to you after the session. Also, if you are interested in posing a question, please use the Q&A function to send your questions. For the chat function, feel free to introduce yourself there or share resources, but it won't be monitored for questions. So if you do have questions, please go to the Q&A function. At the end of the session, we will also ask for a quick poll. So please kindly take some time to send your feedback. We're always looking for ways to improve. And please also visit our Devant website, where there's going to be a list of future sessions. So it's at devant.ca/all events. A little bit of a Devant. This is, as you know, an organization that supports international students. Academica Group actually has been, we are a subsidiary of Academica Group, and Academica Group has been around for over 20 years. They are the largest company providing research and consulting expertise to colleges and universities across Canada. And so they focus on student recruitment, student success, and career development. And so Academica Group started Devant because they saw the challenges and opportunities that international students have when they're trying to look and find successful careers in Canada. So this is why they started Devant. And Devant in itself, in French, it literally means to be in front of. So we believe that our services and support will bring you in front of the rest of your journey to stay, work, and of course succeed in Canada. Devant itself, we're tailored specifically to international students, and we have the expertise of over 60 years combined in working in higher education. So Devant, we are here set up to provide assistance to international students like yourselves. Just going back to that career, upcoming sessions, here you'll see on Wednesday, May the 3rd, we have a expert panel, Careers in Sales, upcoming cafe networks with career coaches. Again, we'll have another live session, immigration live session. And then following that, careers in marketing and communication. So please feel free to tell your friends and family who are interested in these upcoming sessions. We also do have one-on-one career coaching. It's $95 an hour. And if you're interested in that personalized assistance, feel free to go to our site, devant.ca/coaching, and select one of the coaches that you'd like to meet, and we'll be able to give you that one-on-one feedback. So let us begin. Again, my name is Han, and I will be your moderator today. We have our guest speaker, Ziah Sumar. She is a barrister, solicitor, and partner at Long Mangalji Group. She is an active member of Canada's legal and immigration communities. She's argued in federal court at the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. She is an executive committee member of Citizenship and Immigration section of the Ontario Bar Association. She's volunteered countless places, for example, the Organization for Refugee, Asylum, and Migration in San Francisco. She's received her Bachelor's of Art degree in Business Law with highest honors from Carleton University. And she also graduated with Juris Doctor Law degree from the University of Ottawa. So welcome, Ziah, and I am going to give the floor to you to meet the audience.
Thanks, and
And
thanks for that introduction. And thank you all for joining tonight. So like Han said, we're going to start by going through just some general topics about immigration, some areas that I think you guys will all be interested in, especially now that we're near the end of the school year. For most of you probably already have finished this school year. So we'll talk about first temporary residence, maintaining your status in Canada, and then we'll talk about permanent residence. And then after that, I'll open it up to questions. So like I said, the first thing I want to talk about is maintaining your status. So temporary residence here in Canada. So majority of you may be on your study permits right now, and some of you may be still in the middle of your program. Some of you may be finishing your program. But with the study permit, one thing to keep in mind is that there are conditions on that study permit that are expressed. They're written straight on that permit, like the expiry date, for example. Then there are other conditions that are implied, so that you're expected to know, despite it not being listed actually on the study permit itself. And the one that I see being most problematic, or that comes up the most, is that you have to be actively pursuing your studies. So what that means is that IRCC is expecting is that as long as you're in Canada, you are always making progress towards the completion of your program. If for whatever reason you stop studying, whether that's you finish your program early or you decide that you no longer want to study, you actually lose your status within 90 days. So let's say you have a study permit that's valid until 2026, for example, but you decide as of May 1st, you don't want to study anymore, you're done your program, you're done studying. Well, that study permit does not give you status in Canada up until 2026. What happens is from the time that you stop studying, you have a period of 90 days. In that time, you still have status in Canada. However, after 90 days, you're now out of status. That study permit has actually become invalid. Okay, so really important to keep that in mind, that while you're here in Canada on your study permit, one of the conditions is that you must be actively pursuing your studies. Now, there are two exceptions to that. The first is if you're on a regularly scheduled break. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, IRCC says that they look to the academic calendar for your program at your school. So there isn't one general calendar that applies to every international student. IRCC actually defers to your school and says, okay, school, you tell us when this student is supposed to be studying and when they're supposed to be on a break. And so really, it depends on your program as to what that schedule looks like and whether you do or don't have any regularly scheduled breaks. So for example, if you're doing a 4-year bachelor's degree program, and the way that your program is scheduled is that you have 2 semesters, the fall and winter semester is classes, and the spring and summer semester is a break. In that case, you're fine to be off from May to August, to the end of August, right? Because that is a break in your program. And so that does not mean that during that period of time you would lose your status, because again, it's a regularly scheduled break. Now, if you're doing a program where there are no scheduled breaks, let's say you're doing a 1-year or an 18-month master's program, and the schedule of the program, the master's program, is that you go 18 months straight without any breaks, then in that case, you can't create a summer break for yourself and say, okay, I'm on a summer break, and so I can maintain my status here in Canada. Because that break is not scheduled as part of your program, it is not considered a regularly scheduled break, and so it becomes problematic for your status. The second exception is if you're on an authorized leave. Now, we know things come up. It might be medical, it could be for family reasons, and you need to take a leave from your studies. What you want to do is actually get that leave approved by the school. So it's called an authorized leave. You actually have to go to the school, let them know what the reason is for you needing to stop studying, and they have to actually approve it so that you're able to be put on an official authorized leave. And again, this is the second exception to the rule that you have to be actively pursuing your studies. With the authorized leave, my recommendation is that if you do go and decide that you need a leave and you get one approved by the school, make sure that you do have it in writing, because that will be helpful for you later on when you're applying either to extend your study permit or applying for your post-grad work permit once you're done your program. The second thing that international students usually come and ask about is the ability to work on your study permit. So that study permit that you hold does allow full-time students to work both on campus and off campus. Now, the regular rule is that your study permit allows you to work up to 20 hours a week during the school year and full-time during any regularly scheduled break. So again, we're using that same definition that we just talked about with regards to regularly scheduled breaks. But again, that study permit allows you as long as you are a full-time student to work up to 20 hours a week during the school year and full-time during any regularly scheduled break. Now, with that being said, IRCC last year announced a temporary policy whereby any student who had applied for or held their current study permit, so the study permit that they're on today, as long as you had applied for it or held it on October 7th of last year, the policy is that you are exempted from that cap, that 20-hour-a-week cap for off-campus work from October 7th till the end of this year, till December 31st of this year. And so what that means is that if you qualify through this temporary policy, you're able to work full-time during the school year and during any scheduled break. But again, it only applies to students who currently their study permits were either applied for or already approved and they held it on October 7th of last year. And again, we see the requirement that you do have to be a full-time student in order for this to apply to you. The only exception to the requirement to be a full-time student is if you're in your final semester of your program. And because you're in your final semester, you don't need a full-time course load in order to complete your program. In that case, you can be a part-time student and still maintain your ability to work using your study permit. Now, once you have completed your program, okay, so we remember that the ability to work on your study permit is tied to you being a full-time student. Once you have completed your program, and what I mean by completed your program is that as soon as you have received any written confirmation from the school that you have met the requirements of your program, and that can be as simple as your final grades being released, it can be your final transcripts being issued, it can be a letter from the school saying you've completed your program, it can even be as simple as an email being sent to you saying you've met the requirements of your program. Basically, anything that indicates to you that you have now completed your program, you have met the requirements of your program, that also indicates that you are now no longer a student. And the consequence of that is that you do have to stop working immediately, right? So if you remember, we said that the ability to work on your study permit is tied to you being a full-time student. So as soon as you receive any written confirmation from the school that you have completed your program of study, you are no longer considered a full-time student. And so that also means that you do have to stop working using that study permit. Okay. If you are going on to do another program of study, maybe you finished your first, you're starting your second one in September, you can work in between your programs, you can work full-time in between your programs, as long as you have already been accepted into the second program, you either still hold a study permit or you've applied for an extension of your study permit, and the amount of time between the end of your first program and the start of your second program is less than 150 days, then you're fine to work full-time between your two programs. Okay. Now, for those of you that have finished your programs, now may not be able to work anymore, what's the next step? Well, the next step from here is applying for your post-graduation work permit. Okay. The post-grad work permit, it's like a unicorn. It's something that you can only qualify for once in a lifetime, but it's a great opportunity because it's an open work permit that allows you to work for any employer, anywhere in Canada in any position. Now, like I said, you can only qualify for this once, so it is important to think about when it is best for you to apply for it, and how to maximize your time on your post-grad work permit. In terms of the length of your post-grad work permit, it coincides with the length of the program that you've studied in. So if you've done a program that's anywhere between 8 months to under 2 years, then the length of your work permit will be that exact length of your program. So for example, if you do a 1-year program, you'd be eligible for a 1-year post-grad work permit. If your program of study is 2 years or longer, then you're eligible for the maximum duration of work permit, which is 3 years. Okay. Now, you can also combine programs together. So let's say you complete 2 1-year programs, you can combine those together to say, I've studied in Canada for 2 years now and be eligible for that 3-year work permit. One of the most important eligibility criteria for the post-grad work permit is that you have to have maintained your full-time student status throughout your program of study. So while you're studying in your program or programs, in each of the semesters, you do have to be a full-time student in order to be eligible for that post-grad work permit. This is really important. This is where I see a lot of students, unfortunately, don't quite understand this requirement, and unfortunately, it doesn't get caught until the point where you're applying for the post-grad work permit. But it's really important while you're studying in each of the semesters that you're studying here in Canada, you do have to be a full-time student. The only exceptions to that are if you're on an authorized leave, and if you're in your final semester and you don't need a full-time course load in order to complete your program. Those are really the only exceptions. Otherwise, you do have to be a full-time student. Now, if some of you might be in the position thinking, well, I needed to take time off. And so instead of, sometimes students will come to us and say, well, I'm thinking about taking time off actually, because the courses that I have to take this semester, I just can't manage them, or I have something else I need to deal with. Can I take a part-time course? And the issue there is, while you may not want to take a leave of absence because it's a break from your school, it is almost better to be on a leave than it is to take a part-time course load, because you're then affecting your eligibility for that post-grad work permit. And if you are in the position where you're applying for the post-grad work permit, but you realize that one of your semesters you were a part-time student, I would very much recommend seeking out assistance with that post-grad application, because in the end, at that point, when you're applying for that post-grad, it's not as simple as saying, here's the program that I finished, here's my proof that I've completed it and I studied here in Canada, now I want my post-grad work permit. Unfortunately, in that situation, you now have to ask for an officer to provide you with their discretion in granting that post-grad work permit, right? And so it does become a bit more complicated in terms of applying for that work permit. Now, a couple minutes ago, I told you that while you're studying on your study permit here in Canada, you're able to work, but that ability to work ends as soon as you've completed your studies. Well, you actually are able to start working full-time as soon as you apply for your post-grad work permit, as long as you hold a study permit, a valid study permit, on the date of your post-grad work permit application. What do I mean by that? Well, the day that you're applying for your post-grad work permit, you need to actually have a valid study permit. You can't be on implied status, or you can't have had a study permit in the past. When we look at the rules on IRCC's website for eligibility for applying for the post-grad work permit, part of it says that you need to either hold a study permit or have held a study permit. And yes, it's true, you would still be eligible for the post-grad work permit, even if you're on implied status right now, or if you've changed your status to visitor. But In terms of the ability to work while you're waiting for a decision on the postgrad work permit application, that is limited to individuals who have an actual study permit on the date of their postgrad work permit application. Okay, so that's really important. I see it come up a lot with students who have study permits that are expiring maybe just a couple months before the end of their program. And so they're caught in the position of being on implied status when they're applying for their postgrad work permit. And unfortunately, that means that you can't apply or you can't start working until you actually get the physical postgrad work permit. The second thing I want to talk about with postgrads is when you need to apply by. So IRCC's website says you have 180 days to apply for the postgrad work permit. And yes, that's true. The eligibility criteria say that you have that 180-day window from the end of your program completion. But if you remember a couple minutes ago, we also talked about your status here and your when that study permit becomes invalid. Okay, so when you complete your program, your study permit becomes, like I said, invalid 90 days following the completion of your program, or if the expiry date is before that, then obviously the expiry date that's listed on the study permit itself. And so what that means is that if you're applying from inside of Canada, yes, you can technically, the eligibility criteria says you have 180 days. However, if you wait past the 90-day mark, assuming that your study permit is valid longer than, or it has an expiry date that's beyond that, you would actually be out of status on the day that you're applying for your postgrad work permit. And so that means that not only are you applying for the postgrad work permit, you actually have to apply to restore your status at the same time because you've now lost your status. Okay, so let's go through an example because I think this is a bit more of the complicated nature. So let's say you finished your program on May 1st. You have a study permit that's valid up until December 31st of this year. Okay. If your program, your final grades, everything was released, you were notified on May 1st that you've completed your program, from that day, you wouldn't have until the 180-day mark to submit your postgrad work permit application if you're inside of Canada. Because like we said, from that May 1st date, you have 90 days where you have status in Canada. After that, you've lost your status because your study permit has now become invalid. Now, if we switch those dates around, we say May 1st, your program finishes, but your study permit is only valid till June 1st, then you don't necessarily have that full 90 days because you're going to not have any sort of status in Canada after your study permit expires on June 1st. And so you would need to apply before that June 1st expiry date so that you maintain and keep status here in Canada. But yes, so you can start working full-time as soon as you apply for your postgrad work permit. This is huge. This ability to work while you're waiting for your postgrad work permit is certainly a big deal because, well, before the strike, we were looking at about 5.5 months processing time. And of course, right now, we know that all the government workers are on, or IRCC is on strike. Most of their officers are on strike. And so what that means is that we're likely going to see quite a bit of delays in terms of processing of applications. And so how long it's actually going to take for the grant for postgrad work permit applications right now to be approved, we don't know what that effect is going to look like in terms of how much longer processing times will be. So if you can, if you're taking anything away from here, make sure you keep your status. Keep in mind what that deadline is for applying for the postgrad work permit, and make sure you have a study permit on the day that you're applying for the postgrad application. I'm going to quickly talk about permanent residence. So when we're looking at applying for permanent residence, there's different ways to apply. So when we talk about permanent residence, there are federal applications and there are provincial applications. Federal applications means those that are Canada-wide, so they apply to almost anyone in Canada outside of Quebec. The main two programs that we look at for international students are the Federal Skilled Worker and the Canadian Experience Class programs. Now, the biggest difference between these two, and I'm not going through all the eligibility criteria right now, but the biggest difference between these two programs is where you've completed your work experience. So the Federal Skilled Worker Program requires 1 year of continuous high-skill occupation, but that work experience can be anywhere in the world. Comparatively, Canadian Experience Class requires 1 year of high-skilled work experience that you've completed in Canada while not a student and not self-employed. Okay, so if we take those and we compare them, Canadian Experience Class, you can't get that work experience while you're a student. You can't use any self-employed work experience towards meeting that criteria. But with the Federal Skilled Worker Program, you could be self-employed. You can use work experience that you've obtained while you're a student, but that work experience, that minimum 1 year, needs to be continuous. And so what that means is there can't be any break while you're trying to complete that 1 year of work experience. And it also does have to be in a single occupation. So if you're, let's say you're working different jobs, you start with one employer, you start in one position, and then you move to a different company in a different position. If they fall under 2 different occupation codes, then with that second employer, you're restarting your year, okay? Or if there's a break between the 2 employers, let's say you decide to take 2 weeks off, you need a break between finishing one job and starting the other, completely fine. However, then when you're going back and looking at eligibility for the Federal Skilled Worker Program, because that work experience is not continuous, your year timeline would start again with that second position. So big difference in terms of what the criteria are for the work experience between the Federal Skilled Worker and Canadian Experience Class programs. Now, regardless of which program you're eligible under, both of these and the Skilled Trades Program, they all get processed through a system called Express Entry. I'm sure many of you have already heard about this, but I will go through it briefly just to make sure. So when we're talking about Express Entry, it's not a program in itself, it's the management system for these 3 federal programs. So the Federal Skilled Worker, Canadian Experience Class, and Federal Skilled Trades, they're all processed through Express Entry. What happens in Express Entry is you create a profile, you go into a pool of candidates. In this pool, you're given a score out of 1,200. And what IRCC does is they actually rank you against everyone else in the pool using your score out of 1,200. What happens then is IRCC goes into the pool. Generally, it was about every other week. They would go in and say, okay, today we're going to pick the top 4,000 people, for example. So they would go in, go to the top of the pool, the highest score in the pool, go down to the 4,000, and they would set a minimum score. Anyone above that minimum score would get what's called an invitation to apply. And what's important to understand is that creating a profile going into the pool, that's not actually an application for permanent residence. That's basically just saying to IRCC that you're interested in becoming a permanent resident. In order to be able to actually apply for PR, you have to have a score that falls under those high scoring individuals that get pulled from the pool and get an invitation to apply. It's only once you have an invitation that you're able to actually prepare and submit your PR application. Now, when we're talking about the point system, there's a couple factors that IRCC looks at. So they look at your age, your education, your language proficiency, your work experience, both inside and outside of Canada. They also look at your spouse's education, if you have an accompanying spouse, their language proficiency, if they have any high-skilled work experience in Canada. In terms of additional factors, they also look at your studies in Canada. So what program did you complete here? Do you have a sibling that's a Canadian or a permanent resident in Canada? Are you fluent in both French and English? And then on top of that, there's also points that are awarded if you have a provincial nomination. And we'll talk about the provincial programs in a moment. Now, with these factors, you get what's called a CRS score. And that's the score that I'm talking about when we say when we look at what IRCC uses to rank everyone in the pool. So when you're thinking about your options, when you're looking at whether or not it's in your best interest to apply through Express Entry, you're looking at the comprehensive ranking system, you're looking at your CRS points, and you're really evaluating that to say, is this something that I think I would be able to get a score that is being pulled? And with regards to Express Entry draws, I mean, every draw is different in terms of how many people IRCC pulls, what that minimum score looks like. So it is important to keep up to date with what is happening with the Express Entry draws. The other route, like I said, is looking at the provincial programs. Now, when we're talking about the provincial nominee programs, every province is different in terms of the programs that they have available, in terms of the routes, the eligibility criteria, what that process looks like. Generally, though, when you're thinking of the provincial nominee programs, some of the criteria, well, the first criteria is that you have to have an intent to live and work in that province. Okay, so whenever you're going through the provincial nominee programs, what a province is looking for is people who are looking to actually live and work in that province. That's really one of the fundamental areas of the provincial nominee programs, because what the government has done, what IRCC has done is said, okay, each province, you can go ahead and create your own programs to help facilitate immigration to your particular regions. Right. And so whenever a province is creating programs, they're looking to keep people in their provinces and in their working there. And so that is a big part. The intent portion is a big part of the provincial nominee programs. Now, when you're thinking about provincial nominee programs and when you're looking at the different streams that are available, like I said, every province is different, but generally the way that you can think about it is that there are streams that work with Express Entry and others that are outside of Express Entry. And if you're going through a provincial nominee program, it is really important to know whether the stream you're applying for, again, falls within Express Entry or whether it's outside of Express Entry. And the reason being is that when you apply to the province and you get approved, you get a nomination certificate. If the stream that you've applied through works with Express Entry, then that nomination certificate is going to mean that you're going to be awarded an additional 600 points in your Express Entry profile. Essentially, that means you're at the top of the pool and you're going to get your invitation in the next draw. Comparatively, if the stream that you've applied to the province through is outside of Express Entry, when you get that nomination certificate, you do have the ability to apply for permanent residence, but it's not going to be through Express Entry. So that nomination certificate from the non-Express Entry stream is not going to give you the additional 600 points. There's no way to convert it to get the additional 600 points. Okay, and so what that means is you get the nomination certificate, you're able to apply directly for your permanent residence, but the difference is the processing times. So when we're looking at Express Entry, generally the average processing times is supposed to be about 6 months from the time that you submit your PR application. So after your ITA, after you've prepared, you've submitted your PR application, the average processing time at that point is supposed to be about 6 months to get your permanent residence. Comparatively, with the non-Express Entry routes, once you get your nomination certificate, you prepare, you submit your PR application. Right now, the average processing time is 22 months. Okay, so you can see there is a huge difference between these two programs. And so before you're starting the process, it is really important to think about, okay, what stream am I applying through? And what does that mean for me in terms of not just my permanent residence, but do I have a route to stay in Canada while I'm waiting for that PR application to be processed, especially given the length of the non-Express Entry streams. I'm not going to go through any of the specifics in terms of what the programs are for the provinces, because like I said, it does vary. And so it is really important to look at the programs for any province that you're particularly interested in. Before I open it up to questions, what I do want to talk about quickly are some next steps and what you need to think about. First, I think it's really important to have a plan as to what your immigration goals are and what you need to do to get there. You know, the webinars, the like this type of webinar that you're at today, it's a great starting point, but as you can see, it's at a very high level. There's no way that we could sit here today and go through all the different immigration programs and really give you a complete crash course on the Canadian immigration system. In my opinion, I think it's very important to sit down with an immigration lawyer who can go through your background and can really prepare an immigration plan that's tailored to you specifically, to your needs, to your specific circumstances. And that can understand, okay, this is not just the long term, but looking at both the short and long term together, how that all plays out with regards to your immigration. And then the second to that is, of course, when you do have that immigration plan and you know what it is that you need to do, make sure you're working towards taking those steps. So whether it's practicing for the language tests or studying in particular programs, or gaining work experience that will put you in a better position for applying for PR. Basically, you have your immigration plan. Make sure that you're also doing what it takes so that you're able to put yourself in the position where you can apply for your permanent residence. And the last tip that I want to leave you with is that while you're here in Canada, please make sure that you do stay in status. It's really important. We started just talking about right from the beginning today. The first thing we talked about is temporary residence, because it is really important that while you're here, you do maintain your status throughout your time in Canada. If you do lose your status, it becomes a lot harder to try and get it back and then to get your permanent residence. And with that, when you're applying for status, make sure that you're not misrepresenting yourself. It can be very simple. It can be something that, you're advised to do. It's not going to be a big deal, but the reality is that if you do misrepresent yourself and IRCC catches on to it, there is a 5-year ban from any further immigration applications, right? And then, of course, even after that 5 years have elapsed, coming back to IRCC and applying for anything, obviously you are going to see a higher level of scrutiny. So really important while you're here in Canada, do maintain your status. And do not misrepresent yourself while in any of your immigration applications. And with that, I think we'll open it up to some questions.
We have a lot of great questions in the Q&A, and I think a lot of some of the students also sent us questions in advance. One common one was, with the federal strike, receiving a postgraduate work permit, will it take longer? I guess
Yeah, so it's really hard right now to say. I mean, we're a week into the strike, really hard to say what the overall effect is going to be in terms of processing and processing times, of course. The good thing is that you could have the ability to start working while you're waiting for the postgrad work permit. And so it's not that you're stuck here without being able to work. But overall, in terms of how much longer it's going to take to get a postgrad work permit, or what the other effects are going to be of this strike, we just don't know right now. It's a little bit too early, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. That's true. There were some questions in the Q&A section talking about the tier, like different tiers and what tier is a particular job under. So instead of going through the specific one, is there a general answer to how do they look at the tiers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for those of you that are not familiar, when we bring up tiers, what we're talking about is the National Occupation Classification System. So in theory, the government of Canada has taken all occupations and classified them in this occupation classification system, the NOC system. And by doing that, what they've done is they've assigned now it's a 5-digit code to each occupation. And with that 5-digit code, there's a related tier level. So the tiers are broken up into tiers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Anything that falls under tiers 0, 1, 2, and 3 are considered high skilled, and anything that falls under tiers 4 and 5 are considered low skilled. When you're looking to apply for permanent residence, that makes a huge impact. Majority of programs here in Canada are tailored towards high-skilled work experience or high-skilled job offers. And there's less programs or options available when you're looking at low-skilled positions. Now, in terms of how do you determine what your NOC code is or what your tier level is, that you have to do online on the NOC, the National Occupation Classification website. So you can go online on there. Basically, you can do a search, look at the different occupations. And what you're looking for is you're looking at the lead statement in a particular NOC code, and you're looking at the main duties. And basically, that lead statement should really provide a high-level overview of your role, and you should be performing a majority of the main duties that are listed in the description. So if you do a search, you look up a couple different NOC codes and you find that, there's one in particular that really does describe your position and you are performing the majority of those duties there, that would be the NOC code that would be associated with the position you're working in. Now, when you look that up, when you're on the NOC website, it'll also show you the tier level that goes with that particular code. And so that's how you would be able to tell.
I'm going to share that website on our chat function so everybody can have a look at it. But as well, I'm going to also share Ziah's email address because there is a lot of questions. And if we don't get to it, there's any particular questions, you can follow up with Ziah. And here is the website for that NOC. I know it's a little bit lengthy there. One other question one of the audience members asked was about they would like to apply for a permanent residency under the CEC class. Can this person go back to their home country and wait for the results?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. So there's no requirement under the CEC that you have to be in Canada while you're going through the process. Now, with that being said, the only caveat I'll throw in there is, of course, when we're looking at your points, did you get a points for arranged employment? Did you have a provincial nomination? Those could affect what you need to be doing while you're applying. But generally, if you're just applying through the Canadian Experience class, you can be doing that from anywhere. It doesn't have to be from inside of Canada.
That's great to know. Wonderful. Next question is, when are the permanent residency using the TR to PR pathway likely to be finalized? Will it be at the end of 2023 or even longer?
Yeah, so I think last year, IRCC, when they released their the previous work permit extensions for people who are applying through the TR to PR route, I think they'd extended it basically to the end of 2023, so the end of this year. And so I think the goal is that the applications will be finalized by the end of the year. But of course, we don't really know. There's no real deadline that I can give to say, okay, this is when for sure all the applications will be finalized. And again, we're going to have to wait to see how long the strike goes and what that effect will be like, unfortunately.
Is it that they would have to keep an eye out on the IRCC website to look for announcements? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So look out on the IRCC website. Another question came up with, they wanted to clarify about the postgraduate work permit application with dependents. Can I apply even though I have part-time work and include my husband who is in a skilled job like a tier 2? Thank you. This really confuses this person.
For sure. So what we're talking about here is, as a postgrad work permit holder, you can apply for your spouse to get an open spousal work permit. Now, the requirement for your spouse to be eligible for an open spousal work permit is that you are working. There is no requirement right now, there's no requirement that it's a full-time job or that it's a high-skilled job. And so as long as you are working, you are eligible to apply for your spouse's open spousal work permit.
Okay, that's really good to know. Another question, my husband's company is applying him for the LMIA, then he'll have his closed work permit. Can I still apply him for the open work permit extension in parallel? Can he hold 2 work permits, both closed and open at the same time? Yeah,
it's completely possible to hold two work permits.
Wonderful. What if this, there I'm getting all these pop-ups that's coming up and down. Next question is, what if they sent an email that we graduated, but the transcript isn't there yet? Now, do we have to stop working? That's I'm assuming. Is that the question?
Yeah, this is one of the most frustrating things I find with students is that, unfortunately, as soon as you've received any confirmation from the school that you've completed your program, that means that you have to stop working, whether or not you're actually able to apply for the postgrad work permit, right? So whether or not you have the documents, whether you're ready to apply for the postgrad work permit, that's unfortunately irrelevant, because the ability to work is tied to you being a full-time student. So as soon as the earliest that you've received any confirmation from the school that you've completed your program, that means that you do have to stop working, unfortunately.
Okay. Another question, if I'm doing a 2-year program, but I finished in 1.5 years, even though it's a 2-year program, my postgraduate, is it going to be a 1.5 years, or can it be the maximum of 3 years?
Yeah, so IRCC looks at the actual length of the program, not how long it takes you to finish. So if the program is stated to be a 2-year program and you decide to do courses, more courses, or you finish it quicker, that doesn't mean that you're going to be penalized in the terms of your length of your postgrad work permit. You'd still be eligible for the 3 years.
Wonderful. Okay. And for someone with dependent children in Canada, what application can they make for their children to remain with them in Canada along with their postgraduate work permit?
It would be the same as when you were studying here in Canada. So your children can be on study permits or visitor records, whichever it is that they came into Canada with.
Mm-hmm. When I check the processing time, would you know why? And is it really the case that paper-based application is shorter than applying online? Is that true? Example, work permit for 14 days and it's 140 days online. Odd.
Yeah, here's the thing is that, yes, there is a big difference between them. However, it is mandatory that you apply online. So there is only very, very limited exceptional circumstances in which you can apply using a paper-based application. Otherwise, it is required that you submit your application online. In fact, if you tried to submit it by paper, it would not get processed unless you met one of those specific exemptions.
Okay. And where would they see what those exemptions would be?
On IRCC's website.
IRCC website. Okay. Okay. This person says that my PR application says, we are processing your application. You passed the medical exam. Does this mean that this person can expect to hear from them soon?
That's very hard to say. I mean, sometimes you won't see any updates on there. Sometimes you'll see partial updates. It's not, in my experience, it doesn't actually mean that for sure you're going to get it, or when you're going to get an update, unfortunately.
Oh, unfortunately, for sure. Another one, it's a question I think something that you've already touched upon, but just to repeat, if this person applies under CEC, can this person's foreign work experience be, which is continuous, be counted towards their application? They had 1.5 years for 2 different companies, but the same role.
For sure. So when we're talking about applying under Canadian Experience class, we're looking, the minimum eligibility criteria is that 1 year of high skilled work experience in Canada. Now, once you're eligible, then we start talking about the process of applying, and that's where express entry comes in. And with regards to foreign work experience, that would really only have a benefit in terms of your express entry, your CRS points. So it's not going to affect you being eligible to apply under CEC, but once you are eligible and you go into the pool, you'd be able to get points for your foreign work experience if you're the principal applicant. So you look at getting CRS points for that.
Poonam asks, I'm an international student enrolled in September of 2022, study permit expiring this year in September. Number one, can I work for more than 35 hours a week? If yes, what's the limitation? Note, I need to complete 280 hours, April to June, as co-op as part of my program to graduate. So we'll maybe just ask the first question. Can I work for more than 35 hours?
Sure. So that would depend on when your study permit was applied for, when it was granted, your current one that you're using right now, when it was actually granted. So currently, the temporary policy only applies to those whose current work permits were either applied for or approved before October 7th of last year. If that is the case, then yes, you're able to work beyond the 20 hours a week. If it's not the case, then no, you would be limited to the 20 hours a week. Now, if you're doing co-op, there is a co-op work permit that you can apply for and obtain that would then allow you to work in your co-op position full-time.
Mm-hmm. And are they allowed to work as a freelancer along with their co-op?
So again, it depends on what your authorization is, right? If you're trying to use the co-op work permit, that co-op work permit only allows you to work in your co-op position, right? You can't use the co-op work permit to then go work elsewhere. Now, the study permit, though, like I said, if you're able to work on your study permit, then you could be doing your co-op, that can be a full-time, and you could be working potentially part-time somewhere else using your study permit. So you just have to decide, you have to look at what that authorization is that you have.
Mm-hmm. And other questions for Poonam is a little bit more personalized. And so I'm going to encourage Poonam to go and reach out to Zia's email for further information. Because we'd like to make sure that everybody in the audience is getting a little bit more general and it applies to everyone's questions under immigration. Nazia, she asked, can I work more than 20 hours during 2 weeks of semester break between 2 consecutive semesters? Can I work more than 20 hours during 2 weeks of semester break between 2 consecutive semesters?
So if it's a regularly scheduled break, then yes, you can work full-time during that regularly scheduled break.
Okay, if it's a regular scheduled break, okay. Number 2, I need more clarification on the postgraduate work permit. So on the day of my study completion, I must stop working. Okay, within 90 days of my study completion date, I must apply for my postgraduate work permit. Until I get my postgraduate PGWP, I cannot work even if the process takes 5 to 6 months. Is that right? So during these 5 to 6 months of waiting, I am legal to stay inside Canada?
So this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If you have a study permit on the day that you apply for your postgrad work permit, then you would be eligible to work full-time while you're waiting for a decision on that postgrad. So it's not that you can't work for the 5 or 6 months that it takes to get that postgrad work permit processed. You would be able to start working the same day that you submit that postgrad work permit application and continue while you're waiting for a decision.
All right, and of course they're able to stay in Canada.
Yeah, exactly.
Next question. In an online application for the postgraduate work permit, and the whole family is it still needed to print and sign the forms or not anymore? I guess it's a question of the online application for the whole family. Do you need to still print and sign the forms, or is that no longer the case?
Yeah, so the application form, it doesn't necessarily need to be physically printed and signed. It can still be uploaded with a digital signature, for example.
Okay, digital signature is fine. Now, if the permanent application applied through the temporary residence, what happens is it rolls my questions when more comes in, so
it moves, it jumps around.
It loses my spot, and so now I am trying to find that one question. So sorry if I can't find that one question. Perhaps I'll just find the question that I'm looking at. How do we address IRCC's request for attendance record for students where an institution in general does not keep track of them, other than individual instructors?
I haven't had that come up. It is part of the DLI's requirements that they are providing both the transcripts and the completion letter. The school also has reporting requirements to IRCC in terms of reporting when you are a full-time student. So I haven't seen that come up.
Yeah, okay. Is it advisable to apply for my postgraduate work permit? Here we go. And include my spouse's open work permit with the kid's visitor's record.
Yeah, I mean, it is possible. Whether or not it's advisable in your best interest, certainly that would depend on your particular situation. And so what I would recommend is speaking with an immigration lawyer who's able to advise you as to how to apply.
Other questions were around if the PR application applied. Here, I found it again. If the PR application applied through the temporary TR to PR pathway in November 2021 are not finalized at the end of the year, will there be further extension for work permits? If we don't hear back by the end of the year, would you recommend to withdraw the application and apply by express entry?
So in terms of the work permit extensions, I couldn't say right now. I mean, I would need that. I wish I had a crystal ball and I could tell you exactly what's going to happen with IRCC, but unfortunately I can't. I would hope that if they're not in a position where they have finalized all the applications, that they would announce another extension policy like they did last year. Now, with the second part of the question in terms of what's advisable, whether to withdraw and apply through a different program, that I couldn't tell you. I don't have your particular circumstances and what is best for you. Again, I would recommend speaking with an immigration lawyer who can go through your circumstances and advise you.
Absolutely. And we have your contact information if you'd like to reach out to Ziah as well, and in the chat there for email. When we apply for a postgraduate work permit, when can we apply for the the SIN, the OHIP, and the TRV?
So I won't comment on the SIN or the OHIP. My understanding is that it's only after you've received the actual permits, but that's not my area of expertise. I would recommend for the SIN reaching out to Service Canada, and for OHIP, Service Ontario. With regards to the TRV, the temporary resident visa, that you can only apply for after your work permit's been approved. So once you have your work permit approved, then you can use it to apply for the TRV.
Okay, great. Let me see other ones. Are there any upcoming new updates for international students here in Fort St. John, British Columbia? It's very specific.
For international students, I mean, I think the biggest ones that we've seen recently, and not specific to St. John, but for international students, I think the biggest one was the recent extension of the postgrad work permit, and that was huge for anyone. For those of you who are not aware, there's basically a temporary policy in place right now. So if you're on a postgrad work permit that has expired between September, I believe it's 21st of 2021, and the end of this year, so December 31st of 2023, you're actually eligible for an 18-month open work permit. And that's regardless of whether you applied for the previous programs where they extended the postgrad work permits. But yeah, right now, as of April 6th, you can now start applying again for this new program, but you do have to make sure that you're applying for it before the end of the year. Otherwise, there's nothing specific that I know about that's specific to Fort St. John.
There was another question about BC as well. So I think we would recommend just going to IRCC's website if there's any upcoming news for new pathways.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I think when you're looking at specific programs or looking at specific options for you, if you're in BC even, again, I would recommend speaking with an immigration lawyer, because what we do during our consults is we go through the different options. We look at the provincial options, and I have many clients that we've worked with in BC as well and have gone through the BC PNP programs.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the other questions are about the NOC and the tier. I would recommend going into the website there to check that out, or connecting with Ziah afterwards, or an immigration lawyer to discuss the specifics of your application for that particular job. And just for the sake of time as well too, that was a lot of the questions asked under the knock and the tier, and how do we categorize that, and any news information. But yeah, this is a very packed session with lots of questions. And, if we could have, I'm sure, 10 hours, it wouldn't be enough. But we will have another immigration Q&A session upcoming. Please check the Devant website to register for that one. And if you'd like to reach out to Ziah, again, her email is on the chat function for you to reach out to her. But I want to thank everyone for coming in today, especially Ziah, for your knowledge and all the information that you've provided. Very, very informative. Thank you very much for this. And I do have a quick poll for everyone before you go, just to help us rate this session, and always looking for ways to improve. But thank you very much. The poll is open, and thank you very much, Ziah.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
And see you in a month's time, I believe.
Yep, we'll see you in May. All right.
See you in May. Take care.
Take care. Have a good night. Bye.
Bye, everyone.